Hey everyone, Harry here, host of the Vertical Farming Podcast, obviously. In this amazing episode with the Secretary of Agriculture, Matt Lohr, we have a fantastic conversation. You may have heard it already on the audio side, but we had some technical difficulties on the video side. So we have his Zoom video. And when I went to get it edited with the team, what we realized is we have the secretary on camera, which is great. And you can hear me asking the questions, but I don't pop up as well. So I just thought this little preface would be helpful for you for some context in case you're wondering, or it looks like the governor's having a conversation with himself. Rest assured, we are having a conversation together, which you'll hear. You just won't see my face. So I thought I'd come on camera here to let you know what's going on. But needless to say, this is a fantastic interview. I'm so happy his team was able to make the time for him to come on. He's an exciting person to speak to about what's happening, specifically with CEA in Virginia. So you're going to love this. You're going to get a lot of inspiration, especially if you're thinking about something specific for your state or region as well. Enjoy. So Matt Lohr, Virginia Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry, thank you so much for joining me on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
Thank you, Harry. Appreciate the chance to come and share with you today.
Yeah, it seems like there's been a lot of activity happening in Virginia, specifically related to CEA. So I'm really excited to get your take on how that happened and why it's happening and what it's like to be leading the charge in this. But I thought I'd rewind the clock back a little bit. You have a varied background in agriculture. It seems like you've been in and out of agriculture for a while and in public service for a while. But as it regards agriculture, has Virginia always been your home, and has agriculture always been part of like your DNA?
Yeah, well, again, thanks for the chance to come and share with you today. And I am very blessed. I'm a fifth generation farmer
Wow.
in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, which is one of the breadbaskets of the country when it comes to ag production. Rockingham County literally is one of the top, I think, 30 or 40 counties in the country and as far as ag production. So born and raised, and really farming and agriculture have been my life as a young child. I remember my earliest memories were walking alongside of my grandfather out on the farm and learning a love of the land, a love of conservation. And so I pride myself in not just being a fifth generation farmer, but someone who appreciates the importance, the impact, and how we need to preserve and save it. We have conservation easements on our farm to make sure that my kids can be the sixth generation. And so really agriculture is in my life, and really every part of my career over the last 30 years has been directly tied back to supporting the agricultural industry.
That must make for a lot of memories. And you talk about five generations.
Yeah.
Do you worry sometimes? I know because of this medium of podcasting, now we're hearing stories being recorded and being preserved of, our parents or our grandparents. And obviously a lot of that technology wasn't around back then. So how has your family found ways to preserve those stories and that lineage and that history and that rich history?
I'm very blessed that on our farm, in fact, if you look behind me on that wall is a picture of my farm from the 1950s. That actually, when my grandparents passed away, I had the chance to get that, and I keep it in my office because it's such a reminder. I also have a picture from my great great grandparents from the 1880s who started the farm,
Wow.
and that's a great reminder as well. On our farm, we have my house, my sister's house, my parents' house, and then the house that my dad was born in, where my grandparents used to live. And so I've grown up around family, and even now my grandparents or my kids are very close with their grandparents, and it's about storytelling, as you say. And we take a lot of pictures and we talk about the past. And as I mentioned, being able to protect our entire farm with permanent conservation easements means that it will remain a farm forever. And so I think that's a nice legacy that I can leave for my kids, is that it's just the farm is so much a part of me. I work in Richmond now and live in Richmond, which is about 2 hours away. But every weekend I get back to the farm, and it's an active farm with poultry and cattle and row crops. So even though I'm not there to farm it every day, it's still actively being farmed. And there's no place I'm happier than being back on the land.
I can start to relate to that. I'm actually what you would consider a city guy. I grew up in New York and I lived in LA for a stretch, but now I'm in Minnesota.
Oh,
If
okay.
the wood paneling doesn't give some of that away, but we just got our first five chicks. And we just
Ah,
finished building the coop over the weekend. So we're dipping our toes in the it's about an acre of land here, and we just fenced off a garden area as well because we've got deer coming up. So
Yeah.
There is something magical about this being so close to the source of your own food and eating food that you've raised and grown, or even animals that you know that you've grown as well. I can't imagine there's a better feeling than that, and it's
Yeah.
nice to be able to experience that firsthand.
Yeah, and really this kind of ties into the importance of indoor farming. I think one thing we learned during COVID is that people really want to know where their food comes from, like who's raising it. They want to know the farmer in many cases. And out of all the labels that we see on our food in stores, polls and studies have shown that the one that generates the most attention is local. And so I think that really, for me, is one of the things that is so exciting about indoor farming is you can harvest lettuce and it can be in a store the next day versus growing it outdoors in California and it's 7 days later when it gets into the store. So that's a big part of it. And to your point about raising 5 chicks, I think more people are just very interested in connecting with the land and their food is very important. And I fully support all things local and assisting our producers to be able to have that experience and to serve their local communities with people who want to buy local food.
Nice segue, as you mentioned the word serving. I'm curious, when was your first inkling that you wanted to enter public service?
Yeah, that's a great question. I tell people all the time, I grew up in a family where public service was stress from day one. My father was very active with church and the Rueting Club, a service club community. My parents were active in the volunteer rescue squad and fire department for their entire career. And so I grew up around people who served. And so for me, my first chance to serve was as a state and a national officer for the FFA organization, Future Farmers of America. And so I took a year out of college for both the state and then another year out as a national officer and really dedicated my time for 2 years serving the ag industry and speaking in schools and communities and lobbying for agriculture. And so I learned pretty early on that I really wanted to have a career in advocacy and public service. And I knew I'd always have a career in production agriculture. But I guess throughout my time in FFA, I learned that I wanted to combine that with a way to help lead the industry as well. When I was 26, 25, I served in the local planning commission for my county, which helped on zoning and regulations issues. And then when I was 28 or 29, I was elected to the county school board. And then from there, I served in our state general assembly as a member of the House of Delegates and kind of went from there. But yeah, I guess from an early age, I knew that I wanted to have a life of service, especially as it relates to agriculture.
Why do you think that that's an important thing for people to consider who have not thought about it before? Because you mentioned being on councils,
Yeah.
and even working with FFA. There's something about understanding like the inner machinations of how government works sometimes. Now, I think a lot of times as citizens, we just see it from the outside and we get frustrated with things don't go as they should. And I think having the experience of being on the inside and seeing what happens is probably helpful.
Absolutely. And I give speeches and talk about the importance of advocacy, and especially with the ag community, rural Virginia and rural communities across the country now are outnumbered by our urban populations. And I give an analogy in Virginia, for example, the last survey showed that if you start in Washington, D.C., and you go south on Interstate 95 to Richmond, and then you go east an hour and a half over to Virginia Beach and the Hampton Roads area, that's a small sliver geographically of the state of Virginia. It takes a couple hours to drive that. But the last census showed that 77% of Virginia's population was right along that area, and it's very urban. There's not a ton of agriculture in that area anymore. So, really, our urban legislators are making policy for the industry, and many of them don't understand. When I was in the member of the General Assembly 20 years ago, I was the only elected farmer in both the House and
Wow.
Senate. So for several years, I had a chance to be like the farmer voice. But I learned it's not necessarily that urban legislators are anti-agriculture. They just don't know. They haven't been on farms or had connections. And so there was nothing more exciting for me than to have someone from Fairfax County, Virginia, say, I want to support agriculture, but I don't understand how this bill will do that. And to be able to explain that and build those connections. And so really it all comes down to relationships. You've got to get to know your elected officials because those are the folks that are making decisions for the industry. And many times they don't understand what we do. So very, very important. And I've tried to impart that wisdom wherever I can to groups.
What's the story? I always like to tie everything back to an origin story of like, did you always have eyes for Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so great question. So years ago, I guess the answer is yes. This was a position that I've thought about for most of my adult life. And in Virginia, we have a Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services, which oversees our State Department of Agriculture. And then we have a secretary, which I'm a cabinet level position working with Governor Youngkin. And I oversee the Department of Ag, the Department of Forestry, and our Virginia Racing Commission, our horse racing industry. So 15 years ago, under Governor McDonnell, I was appointed to be the commissioner of the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So I had a chance to run an agency. I had a boss who was secretary. And so I knew the process, and it was a goal at that time to one day become secretary. Went to the private sector for a while, then I went to USDA in the Trump administration, and I ran the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is the conservation agency for USDA. And 10,000 employees and 3,000 offices across the country was a great experience and an opportunity. But as you know, these positions are appointed. And it had been a long time since Virginia had had a Republican governor. And so it's a matter of serving. And then sometimes the stars align and the party you affiliate with gets elected. And then you have these kinds of opportunities. So I guess the short answer is yes, I've dreamed of this position for a long time. And the long answer is you just never know when those opportunities are going to present itself. But it's been a great honor. Governor Youngkin has been such a great champion for all things agriculture, our largest industry, and he gets it. He's a business guy. He understands the economics of it, and he's been the one that really leaned in early on about making Virginia a leader in indoor farming. And so I just had a conversation with him after cabinet today about a question he had and the efforts we're doing. And so it's great when your boss supports it and it gives you the ability to just make it happen. And so it's been an exciting run the last 2.5 years.
Sure, this answer depends on the day I ask you, but what's a typical day in the life for Matt Lohr?
It really depends. During the legislative session, which is basically January and February, where I'm tied to Richmond a lot more with meetings and, whether it's working with legislators to help them understand bills that are happening or testifying before a committee. That's a lot of our day for those 2 months. Now that session's done, on average, about half of my time is spent outside of Richmond, and then the other half is here, running the day to day on the agencies. But I travel a lot. And so, for example, last week I was down in southeastern Virginia visiting a seafood research experiment station. I ended up in Virginia Tech for a meeting, and then I'm celebrating the departure of our retiring dean of the College of Ag and Life Sciences at Tech to lots and lots of forums and summits. All of our industry groups have trade groups and conferences, and so just a lot of time really promoting the industry. I've got some international travel coming up as it relates to CEA to Amsterdam. So yeah, there's just never the same day twice, but it's so exciting. For me personally, I like being on the road, getting out of Richmond, taking the time off, meeting with our groups, our farmers, our ag groups. That's the best day. But of course, you can't be on the road every day. You've got to be in Richmond to do the day to day as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So when did you start to become aware of, or how did you start to grow your relationship with CEA as from coming in from traditional with that huge experience of traditional ag?
Yeah. So, for Governor Youngkin has been the first governor to really like plant the flag and say, we want to be the destination. But the reality is Virginia's been working in this space for the last decade or so. And so I first became aware back home where I live in Rockingham about 10 years ago. There was a company that's now solely organic, but they were called Shenandoah Growers in the beginning, literally 2 miles from my house. And so I've worked with those guys and seen that company grow, and I've seen the benefits and kind of watched them expand. So that's really when I first became aware of the importance and the benefits of indoor farming. So when I first became secretary, the governor was very passionate about the next generation and the future of our food production. And we had a long conversation, like right after we both took office almost 3 years ago. And it was really about where we are with the current economy And then, but where do we go from here? The thing about CEA that's so great for us in Virginia is that we don't have a ton of outdoor produce production right now, right? As you know, California, Arizona, Florida, I mean, those are the big hotspots of where that produce has gone. So the governor wasn't looking for something that was going to compete or have different interests against each other. This is growing our industry, but it's growing it in a way where it's giving more people the opportunity. And so as we talked about indoor farming and the benefits, and as you know, less resources, less water, the food safety issues, the length of shelf life, all of those things that make it much more beneficial. We closed that meeting and he said, well, the goal was simple. We just, by the end of our term, we want to be the #1 destination in the world. And so we took that challenge and really rolled up our sleeves. And of course, this kind of coincided with the Plenty announcing they were coming to Virginia,
Yeah.
which the team had worked a lot in that space. They were the big one. Aero Farms, of course, they're the largest vertical farm in the world as far as one building. We had their ribbon cutting last year, and so we already had some momentum, but we also have a lot of smaller companies as well. And so we can get into all of the things of what makes Virginia great, but I guess what we've been able to do in the last 3 years is kind of build on that momentum. And I've been very fortunate to travel to numerous events and CEA conferences now around the world. And every time that I go, I usually get to be on some type of panel or a fireside chat or actually a keynote presentation, talk about what Virginia is doing. And, what we're doing, we're not going to be, as you know, the thing that makes CEA so important is it's local, right? So we can't be the CEA producer for the entire country. That defeats the whole purpose. But we've got a system in place and a framework and a foundation that other states and other parts around the country, I think, can replicate and really grow this part of the agriculture.
In your talks, what seems to be the common question people are asking you? Because I know you've been on a couple of panels, and
Yeah,
obviously there's the big Indoor Icon CEA event in October, which is putting the spotlight on Virginia as well. So
yeah.
as you have these conversations, these chats, and these panels, what are people asking, and what are their concerns or questions about what you're working on?
Yeah, I think the first question is they want to know what we're doing, like what makes Virginia so attractive. And part of it, we're blessed to be in a great geographical spot, right? We're within a 2 days drive of 75% of the entire US population, centered right directly in the mid-Atlantic, where you can be in Florida in 12 hours or Boston in 12 hours. So that's just good luck, right? I mean, we can't change that. But I think we've been able to build on that. And people, other states want to say, well, A, what are you doing? And we talk about the state investment that we do. We've had legislation passed for tax incentives and credits. We have different agencies that are co-working together to offer various incentives to attract them. We've got a great research component through our Institute of Advanced Learning and Research. We're doing work with our community colleges and our high schools and our middle schools, all the way up to establishing an actual bachelor's degree at Virginia Tech in vertical farm or in CEA. So it's multifaceted. So I think the first question is what are we doing? And then we kind of go through that long litany. But the other thing is how are we doing it? And I think there's several ways to answer that. First of all, we have a governor who's not afraid to say we want to be the leader. So that makes it nice. His pulpit is pretty big in Virginia and around
Yeah.
the country. So that's a great way. But then it's about building relationships. We had legislation passed that it was bipartisan. We had Democrats and Republicans both voted for legislation because they see it. This is not a partisan issue. And so I think it's about education. It's about being able to build those relationships within our General Assembly. But the other part is it's a lot of work. I mean, we will travel anywhere in the world to visit with the prospective company, and we go to these events and we meet with companies. We follow up to try to help them and meet their needs. And even the ones that don't end up choosing Virginia, we like to share how we can help, and it's a great conversation. So I think that's a lot of things that we're doing. And I think for a lot of states, they want to know, hey, what's happening in Virginia? Why are people wanting to come there? And it's a great story to tell.
As you've broadened your education about everything that's happening in the CEA space, obviously a lot of technology related and just new ways of growing different than traditional ag. So how has that education process been for you in terms of like seeing, going to these conferences, and sometimes you feel like you're at a technology show as opposed instead of a farming show because there's so many innovations, robotics, AI, so many interesting happening things happening in the space.
It's incredible. I love it. And so we have around 20 CEA companies in Virginia, and I've visited, I think, all of them. And the thing that I love is that they're all a little different. They all have their own secret sauce, whether it's a vertical farm or a greenhouse, the type of lighting or the type of automation or the types of products they're producing. They all have something a little different. And I think that's what's so cool to see firsthand because we're not just monopolizing one particular way of doing things. But you're right, the technology is incredible. I'm very excited to travel to Amsterdam for Green Tech in June. Never been, but as you know, the Dutch are the world leader in greenhouse and indoor food production, and they've got a great story to tell. So I'm so excited to go and see and tour and visit and learn. Hopefully, recruit a company or two back to the States and back to Virginia. But I think that that technology piece has been the most exciting. The other thing that I love to see is, you've got the Plenties and the Aero Farms and the great big companies that have the venture capitalists backing them for hundreds, millions of dollars. But yet we also have companies. There's a company called Beanstalk in Fairfax County, two brothers. They did not have an ag background at all. They were very focused on engineering and technology, but they found a way to combine that. They started their own small company and maybe looking to expand and grow that. So I love seeing the companies that are of all sizes. We have some in downtown Arlington, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. And again, it serves that local niche. So some are very small, some are very large, but it's great to see how they are all different, but they all serve a great purpose.
I've got to make sure to get that list from you. I want to get some of those founders on the show as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They love to talk about what they're doing. So,
Yeah.
and I will say another company that's so unique is called Babylon Farms, and
Yes.
you may have met Alexander and his team,
Yes.
but again, not traditional ag folks. Went to UVA and had this idea, and they build the small scale models where they sell to universities and hospitals, and so it's not really for home use, but it's more for a community use. And they sell and the technology, how they can monitor the growing in somebody's operation all the way across the country. It's fascinating to see that, but it's all about just making people aware that indoor farming is real. And for all the great benefits, how can we have more opportunities and more ways for people to connect and to take advantage of that?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is, typically when you see something like a farm bill, and historically it's always been for traditional ag, and I
Yeah,
think a lot of the conversations within the CEA space is, that's not for us. And so I think Virginia is leading the way in some of the things you've talked about already. Having a seat at the table really is what CEA and indoor farming is looking for, or even figuring out a way to change the dynamics of the conversation. So when you think farm bill, and
yeah,
you realize none of it is going to support anything that's happening in the vertical
yeah.
farming space.
Well, it's so true. So we hosted a Farm Bill listening session with Chairman Thompson last summer, and that was a part of the conversation. I'm a traditional farmer, so I appreciate the crop support and the livestock support that we have for our major commodities because it's very helpful. But there's nothing like that for indoor farming. And as you know, we're not going to see indoor farming really explode until the cost of production can come down to actually compete. Right now, I think indoor farming, when it comes to lettuce production, is less than 10% of the country. And there's a reason for that because it costs more to produce it. So until we can get the playing field a little more level, once we do that, we're going to see an explosion. And I think part of that can happen through the farm bill as we subsidize almost all of our farmers and their products that they produce, except our indoor farms. So, as you know, I just saw today where the House is getting ready to mark up the farm bill. So I think things are finally moving, and we're hoping. I mean, I would love to see one happen this summer, but who knows the schedule of Congress? But it's happening, and I'm excited to see. Hopefully, there'll be some provisions in that can benefit indoor farming.
Have you come across in your trips to these farms any crops that surprised you that they were able to grow indoors?
Yeah, and that's continuing to grow, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, like strawberries, for example, that Plenty is going to be focusing on strawberry production on their first component of their campus. and to see the technology and the robotics and how they do that is phenomenal. But I think the really cool thing, well, there's two cool things. A lot of CEA is aimed at improving the genetics and the crops that then can be grown outside. So we're never going to replace outdoor farming, but even we can use indoor farming as a way to improve the genetics and improve the ability for these outdoor crops to grow, which has been really cool. But then I think we're going to continue to see more and more types of crops to be able to be grown indoors. So the technology is just beginning. We're at the cutting edge. And I tell people we're always going to need outdoor. We're not going to grow all the corn and soybeans we need in greenhouses. I mean, we're just not going to do it. But I think there certainly is a place for all type of agriculture. And my hope is that we're going to continue to see the indoor farming component grow and take out a bigger chunk. Another thing I'll mention that's interesting, we've got a company in Virginia that's partnered with one of the largest outdoor farms out in on the West Coast. And so even as these large outdoor farms of, say, lettuce, they see what's happening. And now they're being big players in a lot of these indoor farming companies as a way to get on board and not be left behind. And I think it's a great synergy. I think we'll always have, as I said, outdoor production, but when our outdoor farms are beginning to invest and partner with our indoor farms, I think it's going to be a great collaboration.
Yeah, because you're related, and part of your responsibility is also forestry.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of interesting experiments of like growing saplings or starting them indoors. And I know there's a couple companies were looking at that as a start. So it may not be, to your point, the place where you finish obviously growing something like a tree, but experimenting, if you can make that first process, those first 6 weeks of growth much faster indoors because you can control the elements. I think there's some interesting things happening in that space as well.
Absolutely, for sure, for sure. And also the aquaculture seafood
Yeah.
component as well. We've got a Blue Ridge Aquaculture in Virginia, and there's several other companies that are kind of looking at Virginia, whether it's various types of fish production.
Yeah.
I think again, it's all done inside, and even when you can combine that with the way of using the waste from growing the fish to actually fertilize the
Yeah.
lettuce next door, those types of products, our projects are very exciting as well. And so I think there's just so much potential in this space that we're just at the cutting edge of.
Yeah. Very exciting times. A couple more questions as we get close to wrapping
Yeah.
up. What is a tough question you've had to ask yourself recently?
Wow. So I guess as we know, it's expensive, right?
Yeah.
And 2 years ago, the economy was in a much better place. There
Hmm.
was a lot more of venture capital money out there. Interest rates were at 4% instead of 9%. And so we've had some companies, not only in Virginia and around the country, that have not made it, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess for me, one of the hard questions I wrestle with is, are we at a point where we're going to be able to continue our growth as the economy doesn't improve, interest rates are high, we see companies that kind of come and go. What does that look like? And so it is a challenge that we have being able to balance that. And again, I think there's always going to be potential and opportunities, but many times you'll have an initial company come in and say you spend $100 million, they file bankruptcy, and then the next company that comes in can buy it for 10 cents on the dollar, and then they're the ones that really make it profitable and successful. So we've seen that in so many parts of our economy for the last several decades. When there's a new technology out there, a lot of the very early adopters fail, but then it's the ones that come
Yeah.
behind them that make it work. I
Yeah.
think we'll probably continue to see some of that. So I think that's one of the things that we constantly ask ourselves: how can we help these companies succeed, especially in these tough business climates?
Yeah. Especially with energy being such an important
Well,
component of
gosh,
all these
you're
farms. Yeah.
that we just in our cabinet meeting this morning, we were talking about energy. And I mean, we're a leader in data centers in Virginia
Okay.
here,
Yeah. Yeah.
requires an enormous amount of energy. And of
Yeah.
course, these vertical farms, an enormous amount of energy. And we see more and more of the demand for EVs, and we just need more energy to sustain our life. And so that's a major challenge. And so whether it's, how do we create the energy? Natural gas is a huge demand that we see that we can't seem to have enough of. But you're right, that's going to continue to be one of the major factors going forward is the cost of energy and the availability of energy for sure.
Yeah, for sure. That'll be an ongoing conversation. So
Yeah.
just lastly, I like to leave a couple of minutes at the end of these conversations for because of the audience is typically founders, CEOs of vertical farming companies from around the world. What message do you have for those leaders in this space that are, driving these innovations and leading the charge?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say, come to Virginia, or at least reach out to us. We feel like that we've got a pretty unique model. We've got an infrastructure and a foundation in place that we can build upon. And we're also a growing state for as the analogy of Virginia wines. We have 350 wineries. Uh,
Wow.
our Monticello AVA was recognized as the wine region of the year for the world by Wine
Wow.
Enthusiast magazine. And I share that to say that sometimes you say, well, we keep growing the number of wineries. That's bad because it's competition. But really, they feed on each other because if somebody goes to one winery, they want to
Yes.
visit two or three, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's the same synergy we have in indoor farming. We've got lots of companies, but we can certainly support more. The research that we do through our Advanced Institute really helps all companies. So it's research that can be shared and help everyone. It's not just necessarily to benefit one particular company. So now that we have, and when we have, like, say, our energy capacity that's really developed to support, then again, other companies can come in and take advantage of that. So the fact that we're less than 10% of all produce production is indoor, there's a tremendous opportunity. So I think it's the rising tide lifts all boats mentality that we really want to share with folks to look at Virginia as a possibility. And also thank you for what my message to the CEOs is thank you for your belief in this space, for your creativity, for your investment, because it really is the future of food production. And it's exciting to see it grow. And there's lots of hurdles and challenges, but I love it when these folks are able to get out there and really make it happen.
Well, thank you for making the time to come on the show. I was really excited
Yeah.
to looking forward to this conversation because there's a lot of eyes on Virginia because of everything that's happening. So I would encourage the viewer and the listener to meet you or see you at one of your panels at one of the upcoming conferences. I know you mentioned Green Tech Amsterdam, and I know you're closely involved with the Indoor Ag group for the CEA event in October. So is there any
Yeah.
place you want to direct folks to kind of learn more about what's happening in Virginia?
Probably the easiest thing if you Google my name
Yep.
and Governor Virginia, it pops up on our website. That's probably the easiest way to. I could try to give you the whole address, but it might be easier just to Google my
We'll do
name and
that. We'll have it in the
CEA.
show
And
notes as well. Yeah.
yeah, awesome, awesome.
Okay.
And we'll also be at the Indoor Ag Tech conference in Chicago.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
the third week of June, and I'll be on a panel
Okay.
there as well. So for those folks that are in Chicago, part of that is there's a chance that you can have pre-assigned meetings in
Oh yeah.
advance. They have like this speed dating for CEA. And so we'll be there. I've got several members of our team there. So if someone that's going to be there wants to sit down with our team and learn more,
Yeah.
please message us, and we'd love to be able to connect you with that as well. So
Okay. I'll make sure all those links are in the show notes. I really appreciate you taking the time for this
yeah,
conversation.
thank you, Harry. Thanks for what you do.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get a chance to meet you soon. Appreciate your interest.